There we go. Okay, so this is our first session of 6 of Yoga Nourish. And Yoga Nourish is really about reaping the benefits for your own body from a yoga practice. So it's not this idea of one size fits all. It's really about attending to your own needs and listening into your body. So with that in mind, we are starting in supine, as you both are showing beautifully. Now you might want to bring your feet around about hip width apart, but if you feel like you want to widen the feet out to allow for the knees to drop down, that can be a really lovely place to let the iliopsoas and the hip flexors to relax. So although we are lying down, it's often the case that we can be holding quite a lot of tension. So let's use this practice to release as much of that tension as we can. So ensure that your shoulders are acting away from your ears and just begin to drop the mind down into the body. So you can, in fact, visualize that process of the mind sinking down through the body, into the chest, down into the pelvis, through the thighs, and into the feet. And just ensure that you are comfortable. So if there are any niggling aspects of your body kind of saying, hello, pay me attention, do pay them attention, and maybe alter the position that you're in if there's something that feels uncomfortable. So if indeed it's, say, your lower back, your lumbar, or say you have a bony sacrum, you can pop some padding underneath that pelvis to ensure that it's more comfortable. And if your lower back is twinging, this knees bent position is really the best position that you can be in. So what we're doing is we're collating a weather report on the body. How does your body feel in this moment? How does your breath feel in your body in this moment? And every time you draw your attention into your body, there is the potential for change. So we may have fixed ideas of how we feel, but actually in life, things are fluid and ever-changing. So I'd like to invite you, if you're not already doing so, you can bring your hands onto the front of your chest, perhaps one hand onto the breastbone and one hand onto the belly. And we're going to do a little bit of 3-part breathing here. So I'd like you to focus your attention on the breath within the chest. So we're focusing our breath into the top of the body, the top of the torso, and really feeling into how that is within this region of the body. So this focused attention within the top of the chest is called clavicular breathing, and it's something that's really common within us. But it also can trigger some anxiety, so it can often be the case that we're breathing up into the shoulders. So just notice how that feels. And then creep that hand down into the thoracic. So this is the front of the rib cage, so that arching element of the rib cage in the mid-region of the spine. So we're going to breathe intentionally into this area of the body. Can you feel movement there? It may be the case that there isn't a lot of movement in that area of the body. And if that is the case, see if you can really expand your ribcage on an inhalation. And allow for the ribcage to draw in on your exhalation. Inhaling, expanding the ribcage, widening and softening that region of the body. Exhaling and allowing for that ribcage to draw in. So this is thoracic breathing. And this practice today is going to be a lot about opening up that area of the body that can get stiff. You know, we can stop creating, if we don't use our lateral side movements often, the intercostal muscles in the ribcage becomes quite rigid. So we're using our yoga practice to help us open that area up and come into a more efficient breath. So how does that feel to breathe into your thoracic ribcage? Swimming is often a really good example of when we have to breathe in this fashion. You know, imagining that this rib cage is like gills and it opens and closes on the breath. And then we're going to draw both of our hands down onto the belly region. So if, like me, you've got leggings on that are fairly tight around the navel, give them a good old stretch and remind them not to be holding things in, because we want to soften our belly to allow for the diaphragm to really open and expand, flattening on the inhalation for our efficient breath. So on your inhalation, can you feel movement within this region of the body? As you inhale and the diaphragm flattens, belly softens and widens. And on the exhalation, belly draws in. Lovely. So inhaling, allow for an expansion to come in. Exhale, belly draws in. So it may be that you can feel a sense of relaxation come in when you're breathing in this fashion. Indeed, it's early days, so there may not be many subtle changes that are obvious to us. But throughout our practice, we're really going to focus on that soft belly and the breath. It's really, really key to our practice. And later on within the weeks, we're going to be working with some energizing pranayama, some energizing breath holding practices, and some balancing pranayama within our asana practice. So, with the idea of compiling that weather report on our body, I would like you to lengthen out one of your legs, so one individual leg in front of you, and release that femur out of the hip socket so you can really allow for the leg to roll out to the side. Now, does anything change? What occurs when you straighten out your leg in that fashion? And if there's nothing that has come up in your body, you can straighten both of those legs at the same time. If you felt like there was some twinging, I'd like you to bend that leg that was straightened and swap over to the other side. Super. So whether you have one leg straightened out or both legs straightened out, how does that feel within your lumbar, within your lower back? So this is where we begin to hone that sense of the witness. How does it feel? If you have any twinging, and it's very common when you have the legs out in this fashion, because the weight of the legs pulls on the pelvis, and that can often create twinging within the lumbar. So if that's the case, I'd like you to bend both legs, so the knees are bent, and notice what happens when you bring the knees up towards the ceiling. So when we come into Shavasana later, if you found that there was any twinging with your legs straightened, you may want to come into this legs bent version. And if you have bolsters at home, it's really helpful to have a bolster under the knees so you can really release away. Super. So we're going to come into something called a pelvic roll. So keeping those feet really grounded, making sure they're parallel to one another. I'd like you to lift your toes up first of all so we can wake up the feet. Draw those up towards the ceiling and then push those toes into the ground and lift up the heels. Waking up the feet, and the feet are so key in our yoga practice. And then lift those toes up off the ground, bearing the heels down into the mat. Super. Now, with that awareness within the feet, I'd like you to think about a rock and a roll on the sacrum. So that's the tailbone. So with an exhalation, you may want to feel like you're flattening the lumbar against the floor and drawing a tailbone up towards the ceiling. With an inhalation, thinking about there being an arching taking place within the lumbar. So if you want to have a look at me, I'm exhaling, I'm tilting and flattening the lumbar. Inhaling, creating an arch, and there's this sense of an arch underneath the lumbar here where the hands can find themselves, and rolling. So it's really with the breath. The legs are engaged, the feet are grounded, and there's this rock and roll. Now, for some of us, this may be quite a difficult thing to do because it's such a subtle movement. So really see if you can roll that pelvis. How much can you roll? And you may notice that the rolling is going up the spine. And you might even notice that the chin is indeed moving. Don't worry if this feels like it's not happening at this stage. Lovely, I can see you're both rolling there, super. Now this is a really wonderful thing to do if you've got any back pain from standing up for a long period of time or holding the same posture when you're working, when you're at a desk. And we're really feeling into this sense of reciprocity within the pelvis and the spine. So a lot of the work that we're doing today is about the relationship between the pelvis and the spine. Super. And then you might like to just drop your hands to the side. You can widen the hands out to the side. We've got lots of space. And drop the knees over to the left. Drop the knees over to the right. So we're coming into a windscreening action. And you might want to widen out the feet to the side to allow for the action to take place. And you can feel yourself rolling over the pelvis. Super. And if you want, you can hold this movement. So as your knees drop over to the right, let them drop over to the side. Bring the arms up into a T shape and see if the gaze is happy to look over to the left. So you're coming into a rotation, a supine rotation. Is the gaze happy to look over to the left? If it's not, you can look up to the ceiling and then roll to the other side. Again, the gaze comes in the opposite direction. If the neck won't allow for that, you can look up at the ceiling. That's absolutely fine. Super. And after you've done an equal amount on either side, bring those knees in directly, hip width apart, the feet hip width apart. We're going to come into Dvipadapitham, our bridge movement. So the arms come alongside the body, and we wake up those toes off the ground. So those toes are twinkling. And we're drawing the knees away from the body. And as we draw the knees away from the body, the pelvis comes off the ground. And as we carry on, maybe you come up towards the thoracic vertebra. So each of those vertebrae are lifting off the mat individually. And it's up to you to how far you go with this. So there's an action taking place with the knees moving away from the body. So if you want to bring the feet hip width apart, those knees draw away from the midline, and you're lifting the pelvis off the ground to come into this almost bridge pose. Lifting the pelvis off the ground and imagining that each of those vertebrae are literally being mobilized individually in order for the spine to release away from the floor. It's a wonderful thing to do for the spine and for your backs, this exercise. So in yoga, it's called Dvipadapitham. It's something that's also done in various other modalities. Just easing the spine back down again. If you want to bring the breath into it, we'll do this 3 more times. I recommend exhaling, lifting the pelvis off the ground, and we extend the exhalation to about 4 or 5 count. And then on the inhalation, we inhale for an equal amount. So the ratio is 1 to 1. So that count for you may be 4 or 5. So I'll count for one of these as an example. So we'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've lifted, and then you come back on the inhalation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And slowing down your breath in this fashion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You might notice that you're dropping into the parasympathetic nervous system, that system of rest and digest, of relaxation and well-being. Super. And then once you've finished with your 3 rounds of breath in your Dvipadapitham, I'd like you to draw your knees up to your chest and come into Apanasana. So the knees come up into the chest, and we can roll from side to side, from one side of the spine to the other side. Super. Feeling into the back here. And with the toes together, we're going to roll the knees out to the side. So we've got the big toes together in order for the knees to scoop out. So we're scooping round to the side of the body, scooping through the middle. Let's do 5 of these, and it's up to you to how far the knees come in towards the chest and how far the knees come away. as you'll find that when the knees come away from the chest, that there is going to be more effort involved to keep the lumbar supported. Coming into 5 of these. Relaxing and easing into the hips here. Coming into an external rotation as we bring the knees around the outside edge. So that's going to be really helpful for when we come into our pigeon and other elements of external rotation. Lovely. Bring the knees into center, and we're going to do some rocking and rolling, folks. So we draw the knees in towards chest, and it may have been a while since you've rocked and rolled, so we're using the legs to roll up. See how this feels within your body. There's a little bit of kind of faith involved here to just bring the legs forwards, and trust yourself. Trust yourself, you can do it, but it's one of those things that often we've not done since we were kids, this sense of rocking and rolling. Can you feel into the spine here? Essentially, our intention here is to give it a little bit of a massage. Super. Rocking and rolling. And then we're going to come up to Sukhasana, easy cross-legged. So last roll, massaging the spine. And it's a good opportunity when we do that action to feel into the spine and if there are any rigid parts, because it will tell us, because you won't be able to roll necessarily. And those parts of the spine are often the parts that need a little bit of attention. So coming into Sukhasana, knees dropping away from the hips. Now, if Sukhasana feels a little bit tight, and maybe if it's bringing any action into the spine, you can come into kneeling. So we're not going to be here for too long. We're going to focus on the neck and the side of the ribs. So coming into whatever position feels good for you, just focusing on a sense of lengthening up the back of the neck. So drawing the chin in towards the breastbone, we're going to lengthen the back of the neck because our necks get incredibly tight. And when our necks get tight, it can impinge on the cranial nerve function. So there's lots of real good reasons to work with the neck. So firstly, we're just going to drop the ear, left ear down to left shoulder. Noticing whether the shoulder wants to eke up towards the ear, as it often does. We always want to shorten the space. So drawing that ear down towards the floor. Really feeling into the sternomastoid here. Now you have an option to bring that left hand onto the side of the head, if it feels comfortable. So we're not trying to increase any flexibility in the side of the neck, we're trying to lengthen and ease open the sternomastoid. Then this right arm can come out to the side. And I always encourage you to sort of move within these positions so we don't get too rigid. And if we tilt the chin forwards and backwards, you can feel into those areas that feel really gristly. And this has to be one of my favorite things to do. To really feel into the neck muscles. It's so key. Lovely. And then dropping the hand away from the neck, we're going to tilt the chin forwards, roll over to the opposite side. So for me, I'm coming down to the right, but for you, it might be the opposite. And we're doing the same if you want to bring the hand onto the side of the head and straightening and lengthening the arm out to the side. You know, and it might be palpable to you that one side is tighter than the other. See if you can relax the shoulders down and away from the ears. And perhaps tilt the chin forwards and tilt the chin backwards. Really experiencing how that is for you today. Lovely. And then roll the chin forwards. And we're going to bring the hands to clasp around the back of the head. So can you allow your spine to come into flexion? So we're allowing the head to come forwards. Coming into flexion, the C shape. How does that feel? And then we're going to inhale and open the chest out into an extension, bringing the shoulder blades together again. How does that feel? Inhaling and then exhaling to come back into that C shape. Super. Inhale, come and straighten. Lovely. And we can drop the hands. So we're going to reach up now and come into the intercostal muscles on the side of the rib cage. So grounding down with the left hand, we're going to reach up through the right, lengthen up towards the sky, and then we're going to think about this opening along the side seam of the body, easing open each of those intercostal muscles in the rib cage. So it's not necessarily about how far across you go, but how much you can experience that sense of lightness along the side of the body, keeping both sitting bones down. And if you can almost gaze and spiral up towards the sky. And you bring that breastbone up. Breathing, remember to breathe. At any point, if you find that you're holding your breath, just rewind the film and come back to a slightly less intense version. Lovely. And then we're going to scoop that palm down, come to the other side, lifting up through that other side of the body. Really lengthening before we come over. Maybe gazing. So our gaze in yoga is called drishti, and that's our focal point. And it can be really useful to remind our bodies to come into certain shapes, and indeed really useful if you're coming into a balance. Breathing into the side of the rib cage here. Lovely. And release. Super. We're now going to inhale both arms up overhead. Come into a twist. So coming over to the left side first of all, and the left hand comes behind the buttocks, the right hand comes onto the knee. With your inhalation, we are lifting up through the breastbone. With the exhalation, with that drawing inwards, maybe there's some more space to rotate. Inhaling and lift. Exhale and rotate. Inhale, lift. Exhale and rotate. On your next inhalation, we're coming through the midline and rotating to the other side. Inhaling, grounding down through sitting bones and lifting. Exhale and rotate 3 times. So it's really useful to know that there's not really any rotation coming through the lumbar here. The lumbar should be fairly fixed. The rotation is coming about through that midsection of the spine around the rib cage. Inhale, lift. Exhale and rotate. Inhale, come back to the center. And now just see how it feels to come into a forward fold. Feel into that juiciness of the hips. So the hips are a really interesting aspect of our body. They hold so much emotional tension. And the hips are completely connected to the jaw, the mastoid. So often when we feel tension in this way, you can feel it up into your jaw. So it's a really good thing to kind of pay attention to. It's one of those birthing tricks, apparently. If you relax your jaw, you can relax your cervix. Little hypnobirthing. So just easing into the hips here. And as we lift ourselves up, we're going to straighten our legs out in front of us. So does anyone have any hypermobility where they lock into their knees? Because it's really good to kind of not overextend around the knees in this position. So for instance, for me, I have to keep my legs in to protect that area of the body for the ligaments. So lifting up through the spine, we're going to come into a side movement. So we're going to stroke the left hand along the inside of the body and allow for the opposing arm to come up and over. Again, the gaze can follow the hand. And let's sweep that arm down in front of us. So bringing the breath into this, I want you to just think about a flowing movement. And just notice whether there are any areas that don't feel so flowing, and work around those for greater ease. Just moving into the shoulder joint here. Bringing the gaze into it. Lovely. And the next time the arm comes round, I'm going to ask you to lift your body up and come back along the side. So we're coming to the other leg. So stroking through the inline of the leg here, drawing the arm up and over. So if you had, for instance, some shoulder history, injury issues, moving in a gentle way can be really useful. But obviously, if you felt uncomfortable about lifting your arm up overhead, it can be useful to make this a lot smaller, this movement. So it's not about making it the most extreme movement there is. Lovely. And let's do that one more time. Just bringing the arm up and overhead. Lovely. And then scooping the arms forward. So we're just going to come into a brief forward fold. Can you wriggle your hips here? How much can we ease open the hips? And drawing the body up towards the sky, we're going to come into something called mermaid. So firstly, one leg can come to the front and another leg comes out to the back. So we're coming into mermaid. Now, can you make yourselves comfortable in this position? So do what you need to do. If you need to bring the leg forwards, you want to create some movement within the hips. So we're going to spiral side to side within the hips here. So this is like a preamble to pigeon, for instance. And often there is a lot of tightness in one side compared to the other side. So how does this feel within this side of the body? Lovely. And then to come into the other side, we have an option. We can swivel literally on the buttocks, if that works for you. Moving from side to side. So for instance, I've come into a bit of an odd position here, so I know that I need to shuffle myself around. Rocking from side to side. Are there any areas that feel particularly stuck? And just tune into that area of the body with ultimate self-compassion. Super. Now we're going to swivel again. So by whatever means necessary, we're going to come into all fours. So for instance, we might just want to come through onto the knees and onto the hands to come into an all fours position. So spreading those fingers really wide, the knees hip width apart, spreading those fingers as wide as you possibly can. So we're aiming for a sense of suctioning underneath the palms. So I really like to focus in this way on the hands because it ultimately protects the wrists. So for any of you who've done downward dog and the wrists have felt quite achy with it, what we need to do is really wake up the hands to protect the wrists. So we're going to do some clocking first of all, bringing the fingers to the outside edge of the mat, rocking from side to side, not trying to create any extra flexibility, but really opening up those muscles that get really tight with RSI and all of our smartphone usage. It's amazing how tight I find my hands can get. And then we're going to spiral the fingers around to the knees. So directing them towards the knees and rocking backwards and forwards. Again, really mindful here. So you might want to bring, if you can, it depends about the movement accessible, with the fingers directed towards the knees. And then once you've done that, we're going to spiral the fingers towards one another and sway from side to side. How does that feel? Lovely. And both of you have automatically, which is brilliant, bent your elbows, which is really key. And then we're going to flip the hands so the fingers are directed towards the knees, upside down. How does that feel? Spreading out through the thumb and the little finger. There's quite a lot of sensation, I think you'll agree. It's quite something, so don't press into it, just let those muscles ease open, and then let's bring those hands back into that ordinary position with the fingers nice and wide. So drawing the attention up to the elbows with a slight bend here, and up to the shoulders. Keep the shoulders away from the ears, and bring your drishti down between your hands to lengthen the neck. So you really want the chin to feel like it's tucked in. And then bringing your attention to the hips. So we're going to be moving the hips in our cat-cow. So thinking about the tailbone. So we've got this lovely tailbone sacrum area at the back of the pelvis. And we're going to lead with that. So I'd like you to draw your tailbone down towards the mat, allowing for your head to hang really heavy, coming into an arch shape. You're coming into your scared cat. Really allow for the heads to hang heavy. Well done. And then we're going to come into our extension. Now, if you are someone who experiences a hypermobility and this kind of lumbar pain in the back, I want you to be really cautious about your extension. Maybe come into somewhere a bit more neutral. So it's very easy, if you have got a lot of extension and a lumbar busyness, to come into a place like that, and it can all come into the lumbar. We're really trying to experience this movement in the thoracic around that breastbone. So coming through the extension, you don't want your gaze to be any further up than the end of the mat. And let's breathe into this. So exhaling, coming into scared cat. Head hangs heavy. Inhale, coming into our cat, or cow rather. Thinking about a little wriggle in the hips. Exhale, coming into that flexion, that C shape within the spine. Inhale, coming into scared cat. And I like to recommend that we finish this motion in our scared cat, because by doing that, we're really protecting ourselves from any hyperextension in the lumbar. So we're coming into our scared cat and we're allowing for everything to move away from one another. So the hips are moving away from the head and the shoulders, and we're going to come into a neutral place. So our tabletop position. Lovely. Hopefully feeling really comfortable here. And with a sense of stability and support, without moving the pelvis, let's extend the right leg behind us, pushing down through the heel, breathing along that back leg. So for now, we can keep the toes down on the ground to just feel into the back of the hamstrings, the back of the legs, and explore how that feels. And how does it feel within your wrists when we take the knee off the ground? And then we're going to swap sides without moving the pelvis, keeping that integrity of the movement. We're going to extend the opposing leg out behind us. So there'll be a tendency to want to lift the pelvis here to keep it grounded. So it's a simple movement, but because we're doing it very slowly and mindfully, that can become quite tricky. So we're honing our attention on that movement. Lovely. And then drop the knee down. Now this time we're going to extend the leg out, as you were doing, Joe, with the leg parallel, drawing hip down. How does that feel? Has anything occurred within the spine or the hips? Now, if there is a sense of crunching in the lumbar, draw the tailbone down towards the mat and release the knee down. And let's come to the other side, lifting that leg up, drawing the hip bone down and twinkling those toes so the feet are awake. Super. And then dropping the knee down. So we're now going to explore coming into plank. So keeping those fingers nice and wide, straightening out one leg first of all, and then bringing the other out. So you're keeping the hips off the ground, and we're working against gravity here. It's lovely to know that we don't need to use any other weights than our own weight, breathing into the belly and dropping the knees before the breath becomes hampered. One more time, coming back into plank, spreading our fingers nice and wide, protecting our wrists. Lovely. And then bring the knee back in. We're actually going to bring one knee back in. So if you've brought both knees in, let's come out with the left leg out first. Let's come into gate pose. Swiveling the bent knee out to the side, and then we swivel onto the side of the foot. Excellent. Coming to a side position. You might want to move the hand. Lift up the hand to the ceiling, coming into our gates. Exploring that long line along the side of our bodies here. And the neck is just straight out to the side of the room. Okay, lovely. And then maybe adjusting the foot so it's further out. What does it involve to come upright? How does that feel to come upright? What takes place when we come into a different plane? So the arms are nice and long. The leg is out to the side, shoulders relaxed. So I really notice when I tell myself to relax the shoulders, they do drop away, because my automatic response in life is to have my shoulders up. So straightening and lengthening that hand down the inside of the straightened leg, perfect. We're lifting the arm up overhead, breathing along the side of the body. And the gaze perhaps comes up to the ceiling, breathing along the seam of your body here. And then let's inhale the arms up overhead. Super, and we're going to come back down. So we bring the hands back down, swivel the bent knee in, and draw that leg in to come to the other side. So the knee comes in. And so I'm not just giving you my bottom, I'm going to turn around. Straightening the leg, swiveling the knee, foot comes to the side, and you may want to adjust that hand so it's in the position that's right for you. Great. Find a space that feels comfortable and balanced. So if you need to adjust your limbs, that's absolutely fine. Lifting up through the arm, grounding down through the side of the foot. Breathing. Lovely. And then we're going to lift up with our arms to come upright. Tricky transition, that. So do whatever you need to do to come into your upright position. Great. Do you feel stable and supported? Do you have that sense of sthira and sukham that's spoken about in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras? And then I'm just going to move the monitor out of the way so we can come to the side. So stroking that right hand, or indeed for you, Joe, it's left hand along the inside seam of the straightened leg, and the left arm can come up overhead. Feeling into the side of the body here. Breathing, releasing. And don't come too far. Just work with the space that you're in. Inhaling the arms up overhead. And we're going to transition and swivel, bringing the legs back in. So the outer leg comes in. That outer leg is still straightened. And then we bring the legs in to come back into your all fours position. So let's come into a child's pose. Bringing the hips back. How does that feel? Super. And then you can see if the head will drop. Now, if, for instance, we had props, you can bring the floor up towards your forehead. But as I can see, Shelley, you look very happy with your head on the floor. Joe, at home, do you ever use a block to pop under your head? Because you can do, if you want, if you have something like that. Yeah, it's just really nice to raise the floor up so you're not battling, as it were. Coming into, so this is Balasana, child's pose. And if you've got the arms in front of your head, just explore how that feels in the shoulders to bring the arms down by the side of the legs as a variation. Sometimes that can feel really lovely around the back of the shoulder blades. So you may have a preference. Super. So finding ourselves in our child's pose, which you can always come into. It's always an option at any point later on in the practice. Great. So just releasing ourselves up and out. Super. We're going to come back into our tabletop. And we have two ways of transitioning down into prone. So prone is when we bring the front of the body down to the floor. So we can come through knees, chest, chin. So you might want to bring your hands forwards for that. And bending the elbows, we bring our body down to the ground. Knees, chest, chin. And I think that is a really nice way of coming down. So it's almost like a press up. And when you bring your hips down, give them a wiggle. Remind them to be relaxed. So we're going to come into cobra pose. So firstly, let's utilize your prone position by bringing the hands on top of one another and resting the side of the face down onto the mat. How much can you release here? To rest your cheek onto the top of the hands. And let's wiggle the hips again, reminding our bodies to be completely relaxed. Lovely. And then let's swap cheeks. So you're coming to the other side. How does the neck feel in order to rotate in this direction? And let's wiggle the hips. Super. See how much you can release any tension before we come into a back extension or spinal extension. So we're coming into Bhujangasana, cobra pose. So releasing the hands away from the face. We're going to tuck the hands underneath the elbows and see how that feels, drawing the elbows quite close towards the ribcage. Great. Now, key thing to remember with our cobra is to keep the gaze down to the front of the mat. There is a really strong tendency for us to want to lift through the chin, but what that does is just crunches the neck. So we want the neck to be nice and long. And the movement is coming from the breastbone area, so the thoracic spine. Pressing down through the front of the pelvis and the tops of the feet. Let's think about lifting. And this lift doesn't have to be an extreme movement. Tucking the shoulders away from the ears. Just looking down to the front of the fingers in between the hands in your Bhujangasana. Great, guys. And then release back down. So you can put the cheek down onto the floor, or you can make a little padding with the hands and wiggle the hips from side to side. So we're going to do that one more time. And you have the option to, when you have your hands underneath the elbows, if you have a tendency or a temptation to want to push, you can just have them hovering. So the back extension is really fundamental to the muscular action in the spine, or you can have the fingers down and simply have them resting to lift. So it's up to you to what your preference is. So we're going to lift by pressing down through the front of the pelvis, keeping that gaze nice and low, and the fronts of the feet press down. You can really feel those back muscles working here, and this is an amazing action to do as a counterpoint to the sitting that we do. Lovely. And then maybe just touching down with the fingers a little bit, you can press down and experience what it feels like to lift. How does that feel? If any twinging comes in, please just take it back down. And then let's release the hands forwards and wiggle the hips. Really important to wiggle those hips before we bring the hands underneath the shoulders, pressing down and coming back into our child's pose. This is our counter pose. After bringing the spine into extension, we bring the spine into our flexion to ease out around the lower back. Just take note to how that feels within your body today. Super. And then as we've got the hands out in front of us, just creep the hands over to the left to open up the right side of the body. How does that feel? To just explore, bringing the right hand over to the left hand. And don't worry if your head has to lift. And then creeping the hands over to the right side of the body and exploring how that feels. That sense of widening taking place along the side seam of the body. And then creep the hands back to center. And make sure your feet are on your mats and tuck your toes underneath your buttocks. How does that feel? So these toes that we're waking up here, now for some of us our toes are shorter than others, so can you tuck your toes underneath your buttocks? You might want to use your fingers to just release those pinkies, those pinky toes, if you can call them that. They're little toes rather than the fingers. And we're opening the base of the foot, so this plantar fascia, which is like a snowshoe on the base of the feet, in preparation to come into your downward dog. Lovely. And you may be noticing some sensation building up there. Breathe through it. Use your exhalation to ride this wave of sensation to indeed make it more comfortable, really. And as we prep to come into our downward dog, you may want to bring the arms out to the side of the mat. Now, for the hand position, I really recommend it because most of us have a fair amount of tension in the shoulders. To create the space for the arms in our efficient downward dog, we spiral the fingers out about 30 degrees to the side. So they're sort of pointing out to the sides here. And we want to think about those fingers grounding down to create that suction under the hands. Now, to come into your downward dog, you'll want to position yourself so the arms are away from the body. So coming into sort of a preparatory position. So you want to feel like you lift your knees off the ground. So find a position where you feel like you can lift your knees off the ground and take the weight into your knees. So you might want the arms further away and lift the knees off the ground. How does that feel? Lovely. And then when you come into your downward dog, really focus on the head hanging heavy, top of the head dangles down, and the knees do not need to straighten. So in order for the spine to lengthen, how much can you bend the knees to bring towards the rib cage to allow for the spine to straighten as much as possible? So the legs are really working here. And then you can explore straightening out the legs a bit. Let's inhale and come up onto our toes. Exhale, encourage ankles down. And you can come out in and out of this as many times as you like, whatever feels good for you, because downward dog can feel quite strenuous to hold for long periods of time. Coming up onto the toes and drawing the heels down. Super. Now, how does it feel? So by whatever means necessary, we're going to bring the right knee forwards between the hands. So you can do it from dog or you can do it from your all fours position. You can bring the foot forwards. We're going to come into a low lunge, Anjaneyasana. Super. And then if you bring that foot forward slightly more, how much can you sink the hips down? So we're releasing the hips. So you want the knee to be directly above the ankle. So give yourself the opportunity to find that integrity of alignment. And how does it feel on the back of the foot? Sometimes it can be a lot to ask the foot to flatten in this way. So you're not really doing anything, you're just making the most of gravity here to allow for a release within the hips. How does that feel? Can you ride waves of sensation with the breath? And then we're going to creep the hips back and just think about opening up the front leg a little bit here, allowing the head to come forwards. That's quite a strong stretch there. And then draw the knee back forwards to come into your low lunge. Super. How does it feel to bring the hands into the inside of the foot? To come into a lizard. Breathing here. Lovely. And really just resting into this space. We're not trying to strive for anything. We're just simply hanging out as a lizard would. And then bringing the hand, so the hand comes to the opposing side of the foot. Let's see how it feels to come into a high lunge. So tucking the toe underneath, and you may need to adjust distance here. It's absolutely fine to make adjustments. Lengthening out the legs. So I always like to shift my weight, like, yeah, that's perfect. Shift your weight if you need to. Again, the knee is directly above the foot. How does this feel within your body? Super. And then if you need to adjust your foot again, that's absolutely fine. We're going to bring our torso up towards the ceiling. So sometimes I like to bring my toes in slightly. So we're using the strength of the front leg to come up its high lunge. Great. So we're keeping the heel off the ground and the hips are facing forwards. And if you like, you can bring the arms up overhead. But think about holding a beach ball so it's nice and wide so the shoulders can relax away. Brilliant. There's a fair amount of effort taking place here. Super. And then we're going to fold forwards, finding our front foot. Bring the back knee down, flattening the leg, and bring that leg back. Super. I'd like you to bring your hips back towards the feet and just bringing the hands forwards. Allow for the hips to come forwards. Just easing into the hips, backwards and forwards here. Coming into child's and moving forwards into an almost upward facing dog. You just come into a position that works for you. So it's really about releasing those hips. I guess that's become the mantra for this morning, is releasing the hips. Coming forwards. And it doesn't need to be a strong movement. Slow and smooth. Mindful movement. Lovely. And then coming back to your tabletop, we're going to draw the right foot forwards to come into our low lunge on the other side. So the opposing leg. Now this is where I find myself thinking, which leg did I just do? But it's definitely the opposing leg for you. You might be able to feel into it. Have you got the side? Yeah, super. It's one of those things sometimes you can overthink. Releasing the hips forwards. Relax here. How does that feel within your body? And then how does it feel to bring the hands to the inside of the foot? You can bring that foot out to the side to create some more space for the hands. How does your lizard feel to hang out in this way? How does it feel in your body today? Lovely. Remembering to breathe. And with every exhalation, you release. And let's pop that hand on the opposing side. And we're going to tuck the back foot under to come into our high lunge. Remembering to keep that knee directly above the ankle of the front leg. Super. And then thinking about coming upwards, we can tuck that toe in towards the front foot and lift up through the front leg. So quite a lot of strength here. Don't worry if you come out, just come back in, it's fine. And release the arms up overhead. So find whatever positioning works for you in terms of spacing to create that stable support. Thinking about holding a wide beach ball And if you have any crunching taking place within the lumbar, think about the tailbone directing itself down towards the floor. Sometimes that can really help. Breathing here, and using your drishti, little challenge here, we're going to bring the arms forwards and come forwards into Tadasana. Can you do that in one movement? Perfect. That's where I wobble. Coming into Tadasana today, for the first time, standing and bringing your attention to your feet. So we're aiming for every single element of the foot to be touching down. So you're thinking about your big toe, your little toe, the back of your heels. And to accentuate that sense of balance, we're going to roll out to the outside edges of the feet. How does that feel? Pretty peculiar, I imagine. And then roll to the inside edge. How is that within your body? Let's do that one more time. Going to the outer edge, the inner edge, and then bring all those edges down. Relax the toes. Let's lift up onto the front of the toes to wake up the feet, and then come into the heels, lifting up the toes off the ground. One more time, lifting up into the front of the toes, really strengthening the feet here, and lift up onto the heels. Super. So in our Tadasana, we're going to bend the knees slightly. So we're almost in like a Qigong position, Wu Qi, and keep the pelvis in a neutral space. So if we have a tendency, for instance, to come into an anterior tilt, maybe we're very kind of busy in the lower back, you might find you're in a position like this and you'll want to come into something a bit more straightened. Otherwise, you may be someone who's been hyper-cued in yoga, who's overly flat in the lumbar. So we want to be somewhere in between. Bring the hands down by the sides, rest the shoulders down, relax, chin slightly in, coming into Tadasana. Imagine that someone's pulling you with a rope through the middle of your head here, your crown, and you're creating some length and space in between all of the vertebrae in your spine. Can you feel light and spacious? Relaxing the jaw, softening around the temples, around the eye sockets. Lovely. And then if you need to straighten your legs slightly, that's absolutely fine. We're going to bring our weight into our left side first of all and spiral into the hip. Spiraling, using the knee as though we've got chalk attached to the knee and creating circles 3 times. We're going to come into Vrksasana tree. Breathing into this space. And firstly, our first position for Vrksasana could be somewhere like this. And this can be really nice to support ourselves. Breathing down that leg, or you can bring your leg up towards your thigh. You can also bring it to the shin. So as long as we're not pressing any weight overtly into the knee, you can breathe into our Vrksasana. How does that feel? So you can have the hands out to the side, or we can bring the hands into Anjali Mudra, where you press the thumbs into the sternum. Breathing and using your drishti to focus your vision on one fixed point. And no judgment if you wobble, just come out as smoothly as you did in the first instance. Noticing all of those micro adjustments taking place around the small muscles of the foot to create the balance. Breathing, allowing for the bones to settle. And then to come out, we can bring the knee into the center and draw that down. And then we're going to come to the other side. So drawing down through the right leg first of all, let's spiral the hip on the left side. Spiraling into space, feeling into the external rotation of the hips. You know, all of our hips are different. Some of us have a shallow setting, some of us have a deeper setting. And then coming into a position that works for you in your tree. So this one is lovely, especially because you get the feedback through the foot. Or you can come up onto the shin, or you can come up to just above the knee. It's really wherever feels good for you. And then maybe you bring the hands into Anjali, that sense of centering, using your fixed point, your drishti, your focal point to keep your balance. Breathing. Soft belly breathing here. Noticing all of those adjustments taking place within the foot and the ankle. And some days our balance is going to be very difficult to hone, and other days you'll find your balance is just there. Breathing and releasing the leg and bringing that down. Super. So we're now going to transition into Utkatasana chair pose. So we're thinking about the feet being hip width apart, again the toes off the ground. We're going to ground the tailbone down, come into skiers. I like to call it skiers pose. So you're coming to this kind of position. It's like you're sitting down on a chair. How much can you take into your sitting position? Then we're going to lift the arms up, but nice and wide as though we're holding onto a beach ball. Relaxing the shoulders down by the sides here. Lovely. This can feel quite strong. Come into a space that feels fairly spacious and relaxed. And again, adjust if necessary. Lovely. And then we're going to spiral the arms down by the sides and lift up into the toes. Lifting up towards the ceiling. I'm wobbling now. Reaching. Breathing. And then we're going to transition with the arms again and come into our skiers. Ski Sunday pose. Reaching. Breathing. Spiraling. Lifting. Breathing. And then again, spiraling the arms, lifting them up. Gaze is neither up or down, it's just somewhere in between. Super. And then release. Up and out. Great, and you can bring the arms down. Super. So, I'm wondering if we've got enough time to do figure of 4. Now, I think we're going to come down to the ground now. So whether Malasana is good for you or a parallel position, if you come down through Malasana, you want to think about your feet coming out to the sides, but only as much as your external rotation is. So when you bend the knees, you want the knees to follow the toes. For some of us, it's going to be a wider position. Some of us, it needs to be more parallel. We're aiming to sink the buttocks down towards the mat. So coming down through Malasana, if your heels need to come off the ground, that's absolutely fine. Really just find any adjustment that you need. So you might want to bring your toes in slightly, Joe, just to make it more comfortable for yourself. Super. Another way we can come down is through the knees together. It's just not so much into the hips. Great. And then we sink our bottoms down onto the mat, and we're going to come into Ardha Matsyendrasana. So there are 2 ways of doing Ardha. You want to do some rolling, don't you? I want to do rolling too. And if you want to do rolling mid-session, like, feel free. I'm with you on that. So there's lots of different ways to do Ardha Matsyendrasana. You can bend your knee underneath, or you can straighten it. So you might have practiced it in different ways in the past. So if the foot doesn't want to ground down when it's lifted over, you can bring the foot in front of the hip so you have more integrity, because we're coming into rotation essentially. So there's lots of different ways to do it. So you can always move your foot further away as long as you've got enough space to move. Great. So we're going to rotate into that bent knee. So lifting up through the spine and spiraling to the closed twist. So that hand can come around the outside of the knee, and then the gaze just follows over. Inhaling to lift, exhale to spiral. Inhale and lift. Exhale, spiral round. Inhale, and then spiral through to the center. Now we'll come into an open twist, so the legs stay in the same position and we just rotate around to the other side. Super. Inhale, lift. Exhale, spiral. Inhale to lift. Exhale to perhaps find a little bit more rotation. And inhale to come to the center. So we're going to swap over legs this time. So straightening out the lower leg if it's straightened, bending that knee. So it's whether the knee is directly over the foot or maybe the knee is over. So roughly about the same. This side in the hip might feel different to the other side. So we're inhaling and exhaling into the knee that's bent. Inhale. Exhale. Spiral. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And come through your center point. So we're actually coming into rolling now, slightly new. We're going to bring the knees into center, and the rolling is basically like prep to know how the inversion will feel within our body. So as we roll, how does it feel on the spine? And don't worry if the hips won't come up, that's absolutely fine, because we're going to come into an inversion, but we're going to come into a supported inversion by the wall. So we'll need a bit of wall space. I wonder, Shelley, if that wall space might work for you with the sockets. Just be mindful of the sockets, they're turned off, so it should be fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to draw the mats into the wall so it's facing, but we're going to fold the mats over to give us some extra support. So if you find a wall space, it will be a case of bringing the mats in, but not right against the wall. So there's a little bit of space. And basically what we'll do with our bodies is we'll have our spine and our backs on the mat, and the legs are going to be bent against the wall. But firstly, I just wanted to check with you, in terms of doing inversions like this is quite a gentle one, but it's not recommended if you're pregnant, if you're menstruating, if you've got any eye issues or migraines or high blood pressure. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's one of those things, I think personally, sometimes my body just doesn't want to be in an extreme inversion, and you kind of feel that. So if that's the case, we can come into something else called legs up the wall. But otherwise, if you just watch first of all, an inversion really is just bringing the hips above the heart or the heart above the head. So what we do first of all is we'll be shuffling our bodies in towards the wall and bringing the feet onto the wall space. And it's really nice that we're actually in the studio so we can do this, because it's very tricky to do from your own home. So you just want your feet to be resting against the wall and the arms to rest down by the side. And you just adjust and feel into this position firstly. And this, if this is enough for you, you can come into legs up the wall, which is called Viparita Karini, where you simply straighten. Otherwise, we imagine that we're drawing our feet down towards the ground, and we lift the pelvis off the ground. So we're coming into a shape that's not that dissimilar from a shoulder stand. And because you're using the wall, you can come up as much as you want, or indeed you can come up just slightly. And this action is a bit like our pelvic roll and our Dvipadipithan bridge movement. But I will come and help you and just say if it doesn't make sense. So it's really about having enough space between buttocks and wall. And you want to make sure your mat is under head, so there might want to be a bit more space. Otherwise, blankets are really good as well for this. Super. This is where we've got, I think this must be for the electrics. Annoying position, isn't it? I had my feet just underneath, but I'm so small. So it's really about that positioning between the feet and the knees. So yeah, just underneath is probably best. So how does that feel firstly in that position, folks? Okay. Yeah, you're comfortable. Great. Shelley, you might want to try and bring your feet up slightly more. See how that is. Now, do you feel like you can get some traction in the feet to be able to draw the feet down in order to lift the pelvis? That's great, Joe. Perfect. How does that feel within your spine? And if you've come up into your clavicular area of the spine, you want to bring your arms alongside your body and bring the hands onto the back of the pelvis. That's great. And bring your elbows in. Lovely. How do you feel? Are you comfortable? Good. So when we come into these positions, we won't stay here long, just for a minute or two, feeling into that. And if you want to come into a more fluid movement, you can just move in and out of the vertebra as you roll down and out and up again. So often in this shape, there can be a bit of constriction around the front of the chest, which is really natural because of the shape you're in. So what we intend is for the back of the lungs to open out so we can breathe into the back of the body. Now, these inversions can feel really energizing. They're great to do in the afternoons. And just feeling into your vertebra. Lovely. And before you come out, I'd like you to just consider the route out before you make your way out for safety. So we'll be easing out each of the vertebrae one by one, finally dropping the pelvis down. So this is the lovely juicy bit. How slow can you massage those vertebrae out as though you're ironing your spine? Can you feel into each movement as your spine comes down? And again, this is why we do it slowly, is because we can't override any sensation. Lovely. And as you drop your hips down, how does that feel? Super. And unfortunately, I'm going to ask you to move your mats now. So with no rush at all, we're going to come over to the side and move out of that and just move the mats into a space that we can come into a Shavasana shape. So did that feel like an accessible way into an inversion without the idea of swinging legs up towards ceiling, which can be a bit hairy, you know?
Yes.
Super. And then as we adjust our mats, you can bring and put some socks on if you get cold feet, if that feels good. And we can come down onto our spines. And when we do an inversion like that, sometimes it can feel really good to come into a slight rotation. And we have 2 rotations we can do. So when we come into relaxation, even though it's really hot outside, your body temperature automatically decreases. So, you know, if you find that your hands and your feet go cold, that's absolutely normal. So bringing your spine down onto the floor. And let everything rest down. We're going to drop the knees over to the left side and open the arms out to the side of the body. And it can be in a very relaxed T shape, and then gaze over the right shoulder. Come into your Jatara Parivriti, your supine twist. Resting. And then bringing the gaze up to the center, up to the ceiling. You can rock the knees over to the opposing side. And bring the gaze to the left. Resting here. And then rolling the knees back up to center. Remembering how we started at the beginning of the session, we can explore extending one leg out firstly. How does that respond within pelvis and spine? And explore extending out the other leg. Allowing for the femurs to roll out of the socket. Now, if the straightening of the legs and that action pulled onto the pelvis by lengthening the lever and created any tension or twinging in the spine, just bend the knees and come into that knee bent position. Allowing for the arms to roll out of the shoulder sockets. Really let everything go here. And to adjust the neck muscles, a really lovely adjustment that you can do is to bring your hands to the base of the neck, smooth up the neck here, past the base of the skull, and stroke up to the top of the head, resting that ridge, that occipital ridge at the back of the skull down. And you allow for the chin to tuck in slightly to lengthen the back of the neck. And I'll talk you through this. I'm just going to sit up. We've got a few minutes to come into this position of relaxation called Shavasana or corpse pose. We come into a symmetrical space to end our practice. So you can stay, I've come to sit up so I can talk you through it, but you can stay down, Joe, it's fine. And if you feel more comfortable to bring the hands to the waist or the belly, that can feel really nice. Or you can roll the arms out to the side of the body with the arms or the hands up towards the ceiling in a receptive pose. But if you feel like you want some grounding, you can just swirl the hands over so the palms are facing down to the floor. to ground down into this earth beneath us, this support. You're just noticing how you feel at the end of your practice. Do you feel a palpable difference? Has your, what they call in yoga, monkey mind, and this tendency to have many different threads of thinking taking place at the same time, has any of that dropped away? Your awareness centered within the body. Is there a sense of spaciousness? And a sense of calm? This time that we take out for ourselves is really important and acts as a space for nourishment. Whether it's nourishment of the mind or the body, as they are both the same, not separate. And sometimes it can be useful to create an anchor for the mind. So if you want to imagine that like a scanner, like a laser scanner, your mind is scanning through your head, down through the neck and the throat, following this with the mind, down through the chest, the torso, through the pelvis. And with this scanning, you're just noticing if there are any elements that need even more attention. Scanning through the thighs, the shins, the feet, and down and out and past the feet. And then with that red light, scanning up through the base of the feet, the ankles, the shins, the knees, the thighs, the pelvis, the lumbar, the front of the abdomen, back of the rib cage, the heart space, shoulders, the throat, the back of the head, face, the temples, the top of the head and beyond. And you can carry on with this visualization of scanning, noticing any areas that need extra attention. In yoga, we call those knots of energy, or those dense areas of energy as granthis. And one of the aims of yoga is to ease out those granthis, firstly by acknowledging them, and then by working with them. In order for the energy to flow around the body with less inhibition. Noticing the sounds around you in this space and outside of this space, and noticing them with that sense of non-attachment and non-judgment. Just noticing them as they are, without layering. And if your attention has gone elsewhere, drifted, you can bring that awareness back into the toes and the feet, wiggling the extremities. And then at the end of this sound, or nada, as it's known in Sanskrit, at the absolute end, so see if you can perceive the end of this vibration from the singing bowl. I invite you to roll over onto your right side in a fetal position, in a position that's comfortable for you. Sometimes it's nice to straighten the arm alongside the face, and you can roll onto that arm to create a little cushion. And allowing for the body to settle here with no rush at all. You can come to an easy cross-legged position with the eyes closed if it feels comfortable to do so at the end of the following sound. And if you are wearing glasses, it's a good time to take them off, to put them aside somewhere where they won't get squashed. And just drawing with the hands down, bringing yourselves up, coming to an easy cross-legged position. I've automatically put myself on a brick and come to a close of the eyes to finish the session. Just allowing for yourself to adapt to this upright position, bringing the hands through center, touching the thumbs firstly at the third eye center. I'm going to bow together in acknowledgement of one another, our practice, and the space in between, bringing the fingers down to the heart space. Namaste. So I hope you're feeling calm and relaxed after that session. Feel free to ask me any questions about things. You know, I'm here to help. And I hope that was useful. Just pause.